We will now directly go to the open forum so that we can hear more voices in the remaining minutes that we are here before we take our break for lunch. To make up for the lack of women's voices on stage, may we encourage more women to speak. But another group here that seem to be quiet are the millennials, the young seminarians. Maybe we can also ask for the theology students to speak up. Please just raise your hand. I will see where you are. Introduce your name and make your question or comment as brief as you can. Please go ahead.
I'm Ben Alforque, millennial. Missionary of the Sacred Heart. This is about the devotion to Santo Niño in Cebu. And you showed that the Santo Niño was being born by a woman for dancing. If I remember right, the tradition of dancing with the Santo Niño began with Imelda Marcos.
In Cebu, we don't carry the image and dance with the image, gabaata. When I was a kid, 120 years ago, we were brought to the Santo Niño, and if we were sick, we were sick. The Sinulog would carry us, and if we were already adult, he would embrace us, and then we danced with a candle. We never were allowed to carry the image and to dance with the image.
Those of us here from Cebu, I would like to ask you to validate this, because I can, as far as I can remember, when Imelda Marcos came to power, she wanted the Sinulog to be an international booster for tourism. And that's when she began to have this kind of devotion, dancing with the image, and make the image ulug-ulugan. How do you say that in English? That you can flatter the image because it will give you riches. And of course, that was also the time when many government officials followed suit with the Marcos Imelda devotion. And therefore, when you go to Congress, you go to government offices, you have the image of the Santo Niño looking down at their open, who knows, how do you put that? Drawers, because corruption, happened. And I think this was also the time of, there was a close friendship between Cardinal Julio Rosales and Imelda Marcos, and the devotion to the Santo Niño. That's why today in Cebu, since then in Cebu, we have two celebrations of the Santo Niño. The government-sponsored one, where they have the dancing with the image, and the church one, the religious one, where we have the Sinulog with the Sinulog dancers. And the procession, there are also two processions. The one sponsored by government for tourism, and the one that's sponsored by the church. So I just want to make that comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, please. That was a comment. Yes, go ahead.
So I'm neither a millennial nor a woman, but I'm a socialized male. But I felt I wanted to ask this question, and it's regarding the spirituality, not just the talks presented today, and I thank you for your talks. They were a lot of hard labor went into them. But also the presentations, the spiritual presentations. And one of the things I want to ask is the issue that has come up in post-colonial theory, the expropriation of indigenous perspectives, the reworking of Western models and putting the name indigenous on them, precisely to pander to the dominant religion so that it can recover itself and say, well, now we are no longer colonial, we include everybody. Our Anitos now are Jesus. There's a certain imperialism in that. And secondly, the negation of the history of violence that was done to these societies. Now, we no longer need to be mental like the West. Forget the history. Forget the violence. We can all live happily ever after and pray and erase the history of violence done by the institution of power that continues to exist and continues to profit from exploiting indigenous cultures. So my question is the post-mental age, is the use, as was suggested, of the baby Jesus and the cross, and it's tying in with Anitos and what have you, is that not just another version of cultural imperialism by both Catholics and, in terms of the Bible, by Protestants, to reaffirm Christian dominance over the cultures they've subjugated? Thank you.
Any one of you would like to comment on that? Jojo will begin.
I think the danger of, the pitfalls of co-optation is very real by the dominant discourse. What we have not really discussed with the indigenous chiefs and their shamans and healers is what's the frame, what's their frame. Their frame is very different, or we call it framework is very different. I think we need to operate within that framework if possible. Because for the longest time, the global north determines the framework and then co-opt us to talking. So it becomes a tokenism from global south. No? So I think there's a movement, there's a shift paradigmatically that the south, we need to find out what's our framework in terms of global south. And therefore, what are the questions we raise and how do we exercise our hermeneutics in the global south? In the same way, I think intercultural, interreligious dialogue with the indigenous people, unless we provide a space to really cross over, the freedom to cross over, or an intercultural, interreligious space with them, that's a spirit space. It's not third or fifth space. I think it is a very creative spirit space that I sense, I intuit, is where they are in. So it's more like a mystical spirit space where one has to enter in because the ancestors and the Great Spirit invites us into that. And then this is where we theologize, not just as a human hermeneutical community, but also as informed by the ancestors who are present and by the Great Spirit, however they call them. That is the frame on their terms. And I think we find it hardest to enter that space because we have so many theological, pneumatological, spiritual baggages that we have no bridges to really walk across into. That I'm afraid we are still oppressed by, enslaved by. And until the day we cross over into that space and experience the way they are intuiting, experiencing, we have not understood that framework. And therefore, it is still very Eurocentric in that sense. And we still become dominating and imperialistic in the way we theologize or we really generate theological discourses here in Asia by Asian Christianity. So we can become another dominating imperialistic theological edifice implanted in Asia, repeated by many of us. Me too. Thank you.
Michelle and Jimmy also may come. Jimmy.
I would like to believe that in Christianity itself, devotions, spiritualities are first, they're not dogmas of faith. There are practices that cater to the culture of the people, to their mentality. But there is in popular religiosity a certain thriving on paradoxes, on power, powerlessness, misery, royalty, that in a way that balances things, as I mentioned in my talk about the over-seriousness of the cross, and then the playfulness of the Santo Niño. And there is in the Christian faith itself, and even Jesus himself has put it up that his model of power is not anymore on the example of the kings and the rulers of of his generation, but rather on service. No? So Christianity itself, or our religious practices, have in their own. There's a mechanism for negating any kind of pursuit of domination. So there are those who subscribe to the virtues of humility, and in a sense we try to, in our spirituality, we try to also to use that in a way. So if there is an appearance of domination or imperialism, I think it is because the moment we are enculturated, then sometimes we take the negative aspect or dimension of culture. But that is not anymore, in a sense, that is not anymore what the Christian gospel is. It is more of the negativity of the culture in which it has been embedded, that we have what we call imperialism. So,
Thank you. Question, please. Yes, go ahead. Elise, go ahead. The lady first.
Elizabeth Tapia from Bulacan, living in Tuguegarao, Cagayan Valley. Maraming pong salamat. Thank you so much for each one of you. I'm glad that we had the time to have the ritual, the centering. I have the feeling that in this conference it has been pronounced the important role and contribution of indigenous peoples and their theologies. I wonder how central it is at present in the theological curriculum in seminaries and in churches. Or do we use them only as a part of our research? What I mean is, how do we make it more evident and practical and be the subject of, not of our research, but subject of our education and spirituality?
Who would like to respond to that? Michelle?
I can start. I don't think, can you hear me?
Yes.
I agree with you that the interest, I mean, it is what dominated the theological curriculum until now in the Catholic world I function in, both in Canada and elsewhere, is it's still going towards like evangelization and not necessarily conversion as before, but still it's a mild form of not necessarily receiving or being open to actually learn from the religious other. I think in our whole theology of interreligious dialogue, from a Catholic perspective, I'm speaking in the world I function in, there is yet no room yet, except with some individuals or small groups who have had experiences that are different. But in terms of the mainstream theological curriculum and the schools, there is no room for actually seeing myself incomplete without the other, or my theology of God, or to make room for profound learning. It's still more now, it's polite to respect or learn about, but not really learn from as something that's really important. I think this has to fundamentally change because we are at the moment where there is because of the question of the moral failure I talked about, the churches and the Christianity looking at the past history of the violence, but this has not sank in yet enough to realize that things have to be done differently. We're still functioning with the old model with some modifications or minor changes, but not radical. This is still yet to come, in my opinion.
And you, Jojo, would you like to respond?
Number one is to say that, in terms of our bibliography, I think there must be enough of them writing and speaking to the students. Two, I think the locus of theological reflection cannot be just within the institution of the seminary or the school of theology or the school of divinity. I think we have to shift the locus from that which is classroom to the context. That means community. Three, the cry of Rio Summit by the indigenous people for FPIC, free, prior, informed consent. Many of us, I included, we have not discussed with their leaders whether we can partner or whether they want to partner us to theologically educate our students. We had Albert Alejo on the team going to meet the Labaiko, the indigenous Aita movement leader, and said, Mano, can we come into your space, which is an ancestral domain? Can LSD bring the students into your domain? We heard verbally the consent, but there are leaders who are also Kapitan and also the civil society movement leaders among them that we need to also talk to. They must have that liberty to want to collaborate with us. Therefore, it must be FPIC. If they say no, then it is a no. Huh? And that we must not, we will feel rejected, I think, but I think it's good for the subjectivity of them to emerge and encounter us co-evaluate frontally and say no, because we are not ready for you, or because you think that we want to give back the Bible to you. It might come to that. No? Last of all, I think I also feel very strongly that their elders must speak to the students in their language, because they don't speak Tagalog very well. Let them speak in the language, and then those among them who are bifocal, multifocal, translate for our understanding. And then we theologize together. This is hard for, I think, an intertextual. One is textual, the other one is oral. To intertextually exercise a cultural or intercultural and communal hermeneutics. That is hard to come by. But I think there's no other choice, whereby the way we theologize must be subjected to their, I don't know what's the word. They must give legitimacy to the way we the way we theologize. No? It is always unilateral. They are not involved. And I see that they're not involved yet at the theological level. No? So I'm not too sure how to go about it. It's like deja vu, but I think it's possible, and that we must do it together. And it must not be at the very discursive, highly intellectual level. It can be storytelling over a cup of coffee underneath a tree, where I think, they will say that, let's have a prayer first, their way. So it's on their term. Let them determine how the process goes. Because for them it's mystical, mystagogical. No? So let them determine their terms. And then we go into it. I really, the rest of it is just dots. I don't know where this whole thing will lead to. But I think you and I, the learned and the wise must dance together. Otherwise there's no dance.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Gentleman who's here. Go ahead.
My name is Joseph Johnson Abba.
I just have two simple questions. One goes to my professor, Father Jumi, and the other one goes to Miche. I am inspired by your statement that dressing Saint Antonio and Black Nazarene is a sign of alternative vision of power. Please, my clarification is that each year, the celebration of Black Nazarene, why is it that people have to die in the course of that spirituality? I don't know whether it is too extreme. So I want a kind of clarification on that, because from the way you presented your PowerPoint, the celebrations are about life, love. And then to you, Mike, I don't know whether you have already answered the theological question you posed. Now that the government has apologized by taking the land and some of the people, so I don't know whether there was any way that the damage done has been repaired. Thank you.
Has that the damage done been repaired? Yes. Go ahead, Jimmy. First question.
Why do people have to die? Well, they don't have to die. People die in the streets, but they don't have to die. People die in traffic, but they don't have to die. It's not part itself of the religious celebration. It is just, again, factors of human whatever. No? So it's not, I mean, it's unfortunate that people die, but they don't have to die.
Thank you. Last comment.
What has been done cannot really be repaired. The damage and the violence is so deep and so profound. It's a process. It's what's now in this in the proposal of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is to look for a future together and somehow in a process of healing. But the land, which is the main topic of this panel, and it's still the central issue, and the fact that these people have been displaced all over the continent and any other parts of the world is a controversial. That's the most controversial issue in this whole process of reconciliation, because the land has been taken away, cannot be returned. It's the policies of extraction and abuse of the land continue because the economy is in a place like Canada is built on the extraction of natural resources from indigenous land. So these claims are all being, the land claims are being forcefully supported, and I don't think the indigenous movements will give up before they actually have satisfactory compensation and major changes in this regard. So it will take some time, but at the same time they are not waiting on the government to acknowledge this or to do the land. There are multiple ways in how the healing and the repair is happening internally, as I tried to demonstrate in the little description from Leanne Simpson and her work. It doesn't really depend on. It's no longer waiting on the other to give, and because this was the main shift that we tried to talk about. That for many years they were demanding the government and waiting for answers. Now that the rules of the terms of the relationship are changing, and they are the processes are also in a different. The dynamics of the healing and recovery are also different.
With that, we are closing this session, and please we give a round of applause to our previous person.